Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's episode, Ask Me Almost Anything, How Do You Write Multiple Storylines? My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything here at Writing for Screens, a channel in which I have tried to take all of the skills and tools and insights that I gained in a 25-year career writing for TV and movies, tried to take all of those and condense them down into usable tips and things to try, which I have offered to you on my way out of the business, so that you hopefully won't have to figure out everything for yourself. You can go through this set of lessons and see if anything works for you. There is no system, there are no rules, there is no right or wrong way to create. If you find something in all of this that is useful to you, you take it. If not, throw it out and do what is good for you, because every artist must make their own path, must figure out their own style, must decide what kind of work they can do, what kind of work they want to do, and figure out what works for you, for the way you work. That is the big message of this whole channel. In trying to give you that, I have taken a whole bunch of topics I have made. Here's a little screenshot of my channel main page, and if you look down towards the bottom, you will see a set of playlists. These playlists, here's a close-up. The first three of them have 50 10-minute videos. Each one of them is on a specific topic, genre, character, dialogue, outlines, and each one, the topic is not just the title, but also the thumbnail. So you can just scroll through, look at these big colorful letters and say, hey, I want to see what he has to say about flashbacks. That is what I urge you to do. They are here 24/7 for free for you. There are no order to put them in. Just try and look at as many as you can, because I think you would be surprised how useful they are. They're just full of tips and tidbits and tricks to try so that you can see what works for you. When I am not doing that, I come on live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time Zone to talk about a particular topic, something different every week, and to answer questions. Today's topic, as I have said, is how do you write multiple storylines, which a lot of people have asked me about. Before I get into that, I'm going to say some quick hellos. Hello, Pelicans. Hello, Feng. It is afternoon here. Thank you very much. Hello, Ming and Wolf Powers and Marcus. Good to see all of you. Okay, let's get started on the topic, because over the years, a lot of people have asked about this. And I think partly they do it because they have been so deeply discouraged by the screenwriting educational enterprise that has taken over our world, which all emphasizes that every story must be about one person. That's not true. That is simply a formula that people are desperately clinging to in the hopes that they can, quote, succeed. Stories are not supposed to be necessarily just about one person. That is just what I think of as the desperation for a formula. It affects almost everyone. Certainly people in the business, they're looking for some formula, some set of rules that they can say, this is how you have a hit. Obviously, if there was such a thing, people would have used it far more often instead of making so many things that do not work as well as they hoped. Teachers, theorists, people who write books, people who make videos, and even artists themselves are all desperate for a rule, for a formula, for some universal truth, which they can then say, I don't have to worry anymore. I can just do that. I believe such a thing does not exist, that all art is about choices. There are many possibilities, and what makes art is the act of making your choice, saying, this is the kind of story I want to tell, this is the kind of thing I want to say, this is the kind of style I'm going to say it in. Those are the choices you make. There is not a right or wrong, and no one has yet to prove anything different. If you don't agree, fight me. I'd be happy to arrange some kind of verbal cage match on the topic. Let me do some more hellos, and then I will go on. Hello, Michael and Susan and Doreen. So let's talk about why you would do it. Why would you tell a story with multiple characters or multiple storylines, multiple main characters? Almost every story has multiple characters. Um, for one thing, if you are trying to talk about an event or a theme or a place, a world, a culture, a moment in time, all of those things are false to be defined as one person's story. If you want to talk about ancient Rome, or you want to talk about love, or you want to talk about war, that is not one person's story. That is a topic that you are trying to examine by following multiple characters in or through that event, that world, that time. It is actually quite sad when people try and force a large universal question or a topic or a time into one person's experience. I have to say, I particularly remember there's a movie about the Boston Marathon bombing case, which has a lot of interesting things in it. But one of the things they did was they took all of these different police and first responders and investigators, and they put them all into one main character. And it was simply not remotely believable that one person was doing all of this stuff. And anyone who knew about the case would say, that's not what happened. Lots of different people working together is the truth of responding to an emergency, a catastrophe. So what actually bothers me about forcing things into a one-character story is how much it betrays our own lived experience, how much of our lived experience is in fact something that revolves around a community or a group or a society, things that simply are not just one person's epic journey. Sometimes multiple points of view are in fact the point of the story, most notably, of course, the famous Japanese film Rashomon. You can't say that that's one person's story. You shouldn't say it is. The whole point is that there's many ways to look at an event. This idea of telling stories in which multiple characters are interwoven goes back to mythology. It goes back to the very first storytelling. Shakespeare certainly did it. Most of his comedies involve multiple storylines. The 19th century novels specialize in it. War and Peace, Bleak House, Charles Dickens' masterpiece, are all stories involving multiple characters and storylines. James Joyce's Ulysses, to bring it into the modern era. As far as drama, Shaw, Chekhov, Ibsen, they all do this. It's simply part of literature. On a practical note, though, before we get into the how-to of multiple storylines, I do want to point out that many executives and producers and teachers, if you are in a class, are trained, are honestly brainwashed into believing that a story must have a single central character. If you are working with them, if you are working for a producer who believes this, if you are in a class with a teacher who believes this, if you are trying to work with this person or take their class, follow their rules. You do not have to do so in the rest of your life, but while you are working with them, you should do what they believe because it's their class, it's their project, it's their company, whatever it is. Likewise, if you are trying to get the approval of readers who have been trained this way, and most readers in the contest world and the production world, they have a certain prejudice against multiple storylines, although the good ones know better. Anyway, my point is, even though it is not true that there is only one kind of story, sometimes under certain circumstances, it's best to pursue the lie. Okay, so now let's talk about there are in fact many different types of multiple storyline structures. So let's talk a little bit about those. The first one is, well, this is just a list of the different types. There's interwoven stories. There's ensembles or centered ensembles. That's my own name for this thing. There's what I like to call a whittling down story or interwoven collection. So let's talk about a little bit about these. The first one, interwoven stories. This is the one where you really see a lot of this. You have a set of different characters, but one story that they are all contributing to. The characters may split up and follow separate paths, come together, things like that. The Star Wars movies often do this. Lord of the Rings does it. a lot of heist movies, horror movies, disaster movies, certainly. There's just lots of stories where you have a group of people working together or in competition, and you're going back and forth between them. As I have said, this concept of storytelling is certainly as old as literature itself, but was particularly popular in the days of 19th century novels, in which intercutting between storylines helps improve the drama, the suspense, the emotion. But there are other kinds of stories like this. There's such a thing as an ensemble story, in which you have a group of characters together, but only one story. And it's the story of this group of people coming together. 12 Angry Men, The Big Chill. There are many stories in which you're telling the story of what happens when a group of people get together to do something or having some experience together. There's a kind of variation on this that I've noticed called what I call the centered ensemble. The centered ensemble, that's the third one down here on this list. You've got a main character, but it's really that main character is guiding or working with an ensemble of other people. Saving Private Ryan, for instance. Tom Hanks is clearly the central character, but in fact that is an ensemble story. It's a story of a platoon working its way through a certain set of a mission. Platoon, also the movie. Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, especially the original 1970s version. Walter Matthau is clearly the main character, but in fact, you're following and tracking a whole lot of different storylines. Another type of multiple storyline structure is what I call the whittling down story, which is something that starts as an ensemble, but then slowly works its way down to just the main character and whatever they are facing. Horror movies in particular, you'll start with a group of people, and as the story goes on, some are killed off, and so you end up with the final girl or the final character facing the evil of the story. That happens a lot. And then there's what I like to call an interwoven collection, which is a set of stories which are related by a theme or a place or an event, but those stories may or may not interact at all. They're simply running parallel to each other or crossing each other. Nashville, Robert Altman's film, and actually many Robert Altman's films. There were also a bunch of what you might call collection movies. There was one called Valentine's Day, one called New Year's Eve, which cut between a series of people all on New Year's Eve or all on Valentine's Day, having their different love stories or their different tales. Love Actually, the brilliant romantic comedy from Richard Curtis. So that's what I would call a interwoven collection. These people may or may not encounter each other at all, but we are watching the sum of them. We are watching all of them because they all contribute to our understanding of the feeling or the theme. Love Actually being about love, actually. The other type is something that I think you'll see a lot, which people don't maybe consider a multiple storyline, but in fact it is, the bee story. And by that, I do not mean the animated movie about bees. I mean, bee story is an A story, B story, in which your main character is the A story, the central story, the main character, but there is a subplot with a secondary character. This often happens. The point about all of these is that you're often structuring things with multiple characters. Each type of structure has its own requirements, its own habits. Obviously, if you're telling something with interwoven connections, you have to decide how much are these people going to connect, how much are they going to simply pass each other, or are they simply not going to connect at all, and it's the audience's job to put them together. Any of these things is possible. So with this sort of breakdown of the possible types of multiple storylines, the first thing I would think you should do is think about exactly what structure are you working with? Are you working with a story in which you've got a set of characters who are competing or collaborating but have separated into separate storylines, like a heist movie where one person is, in the lookout position and one person has gone into the bank? Or are you talking more about something where you have a race? There's several movies about races in which you're following several different competitors dealing with trying to win the prize. Whatever that structure is, you need to figure that out so that you can make it work as well as you can. Over and over, by the way, going to talk about this idea of looking at examples. I've got a video that I did on this. Please check in the description here. There's links to 3 of my other videos which get into details about how to do it. But the main thing is, if you're doing a story with an ensemble where a bunch of people are brought together for a birthday party and everything's going to all come out about the family, or 12 Angry Men, a bunch of people brought in on a jury to decide a case, you should look at stories like that. See how they work. What do they do to maintain the drama, to maintain your interest in the different characters as they interact? There is not one set of rules. I'm going to talk about some tips for things that you might want to look at for whatever story you're doing. But the first thing to do is figure out, what is the structure? Is this like Saving Private Ryan, where you've got a person with their ensemble around them, but the main character is driving the story? Or is it something like Love Actually, where you have a whole bunch of people and they're all going in their different paths and running into each other? That's for you to decide. When you do it, let's talk about how. The first thing I wanted to say about this was simply, I've been quite surprised at how many questions I get about this problem. Because to me, I honestly feel like the main thing that you have to remember is, it's really no different than telling any story. You just treat your interwoven stories as stories. Each one is a story. They are interweaving, but each one is its own story. In that sense, I want to mention my video, Building Character Arcs, where I really detail how you can plot out each story. I personally advise outlining when you do it, but you don't have to. If you want to just rough draft it and then try and analyze it afterwards, that'll work too. The main thing is all the same rules or approaches that you take to any single story is how you should take multiple stories. It's the same idea. You just have to add a little layer of complexity to your work and to your mind of judging it. But there's really no difference. It's just story. It's characters trying to get something, having a problem, having a goal, having some kind of obstacles, and thinking in scenes, figuring out what are the steps that they must take in order to gain their goal. What happens to throw them off that path or to change their intentions? All those things are true of every single character in interwoven stories. So it's just the same game, just you're adding some layers. That's really all there is to know about it. If you like stories of this type, if you're telling a story of this type, you probably like it, which means you've probably looked at some or been inspired by some. Look at those and say, how do they do it? You already know. You already wanted to do it. It's going to be fine. Many people say that they are intimidated by it because they are criticized for having, quote, too many characters. If you get this criticism, and I'm assuming you're doing this either by having shown someone a draft or something, the question is then, is the person who says you've got too many characters simply following a rule and saying, I believe there has to be a main character and therefore I am simply rejecting anything that doesn't have that? Or is it that you have not made your characters distinctive enough? You have not given them a memorable, clear storyline within this structure that you've built. It's worth checking to see if somebody says there are too many characters, is this simply because you haven't made those things evident enough, powerful enough in your structure? If that's true, that's something you should work on. But if not, then maybe too many characters just means somebody has a rule or somebody just doesn't like multiple characters lines. That's okay. But the thing about understanding why someone might feel like you have too many characters, one of the main elements is, have you made clear why you are telling a story with multiple characters? And this really gets down to, what is the relationship between the stories? In other words, if you are telling the story of, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, there is a central goal. They are trying to defeat the Empire or get rid of the ring. But what you're also following is the idea, for instance, in Lord of the Rings, that there is this world of differing populations, differing peoples, and each one of them is having some kind of struggle with their place in the world. Hobbits not wanting to much get out, elves having been once the rulers of everything and now sort of sliding away, the world of men on the rise but having the flaws of mankind. Each one of these things, they are shown in the relationships. In the story itself, you should see that the way that the elves treat the men, the way that the various factions treat each other as storylines, this is part of what reveals what they are. And then each storyline, in other words, if one is about the rise of a group or the fall of a group, you need to understand that. If in Saving Private Ryan, you have to understand that the way that each member of the group deals with an apparently futile or foolish and dangerous mission indicates sort of a philosophical question of what is the best way to deal with our imminent death. If you choose to, you can look at Saving Private Ryan as sort of an existential philosophical question. We're all going to die. These people in this war are probably, it's more imminent. But the question is, how do you face that? Do you face that by focusing on the mission? Do you face it by hardening your heart? Do you face it by fighting the authorities? Each character is dealing with this in their own way. Are the stories interweaving because you are trying to show the need for collaboration or the need for community? Or are they clashing and interfering with each other? Are you trying to show the values of competition and what is going to win? Are you showing these different aspects because you are trying to get to a theme, as in 12 Angry Men, the theme of judging and justice, and the question of what personal elements of a person is interfering with their ability to be just? All of these things are possible. The main thing is that you have to think, if all of your storylines are simply telling the same type of story, why are you bothering to have them? There should be some kind of difference, some kind of contrast, some kind of collaboration, some kind of conflict. Whatever it is, there should be a reason that you have multiple storylines. And it's your responsibility to decide what each layer plays in the larger unified vision of the story. But then one of the other questions that comes up about this is, how do I keep interest in the different storylines if I'm going to have to keep cutting away from them? I would say that one of the main ways is these stories should affect each other. They should matter to each other, or at very least, they should illuminate each other. In other words, the characters' actions should in some way let us understand things about each other that they may not be able to understand themselves. Either that, or they should be changing each other. What they do in one storyline affects the other people. It frightens them. It challenges them. It makes them have to face things in themselves. It makes them define themselves. Whatever it is, there should be some reason that you are showing different elements and they should have a difference to them. Or in the sense of something like Nashville, you are following a lot of different people as a way of saying the place, the music industry in the 1970s in Nashville, Tennessee, is the subject. And no single person is embodying that. They all have their place in giving a portrait of this community. That's the point of it. So each one, the point is, are you showing how the community can break a spirit, how the community can give talent a place to go? Are you showing how some people are superficial about what they're doing there with the music and other ones are very deeply personal? Whatever it is, the point of this is that each one should play their part in the big picture. Finally, and once again, I'm going to bring up this video, Building Character Arcs. Please take a look at it, because one of the main things about every interwoven or complex storylines story is each story has to be a satisfying story in itself. Like if you just cut out everything else in the story except the one storyline and you had a 20-minute movie, it should follow. It should be a story. It's going to have perhaps gaps or things that you wish you'd gone into more deeply, but it should be a trackable, emotionally clear story. Every single story. This video, Building Character Arcs, is really one good way to understand that. The other element that you want to do is you have to keep the parts of your story, the elements of your story, relatively simple and memorable. If you're going to be bouncing back and forth between different storylines, you need to, first of all, have them be distinctive from each other. You have to be able to see or understand who you are tracking when you come to that storyline. You can't say, oh, that person and that person, they kind of look alike and they're kind of doing the same thing, and the world that they're in is kind of the same. So it's sort of hard to recognize that you've switched from one to the other. They should be distinctive. They should be unique. You should understand who these people are, which means they have to be somewhat simple, perhaps simpler than a single storyline would be, because you have less time with them. That's really the key to these stories, is you do need to make them clearer and simpler, not necessarily obvious, not necessarily stupid, but clearer and simpler, because you have fewer beats to work with. So what you want to do is make sure that the elements of your stories are reasonably simple and memorable, so that we can understand when we see, this person, oh, they're the one who's trying to get the hairdresser to open the safe, or whatever it is. You know when you go back to them what their storyline was. And part of that means the transitions matter. In other words, you want to be able to end a segment, a scene, a part of the story that you're going to cut away from to another story. You want to end it either at the conclusion of a step of the story, or in some way where something is revealed or set up so that you are sort of left hanging, a little bit of a cliffhanger, a mini cliffhanger at the end of one segment, so that when you switch to the others, you say, when we come back to them, I'm going to be wondering what happened to them. Or that you say, this group, this person just accomplished this step of their journey. Whew, that's settled. I wonder what's happening on the other side. Let's go over there. Whatever it is, you need to understand that you are closing off each part and opening the next part, which means the next part in some way needs to remind you of who you're going to switch over to, remind you of what their big problem is. These are very subtle things, but it's important to keep in your mind as you think in scenes that the scene is going to be continuing from something, not the past scene, but the scene before that, that you are sort of checkerboarding between stories. By the way, this is a story that was very interesting. Francis Ford Coppola talked about Godfather Part 2, in which you are dealing with two storylines. the story of a father and a son in two different eras, and you cut back and forth between them during the entire movie. What Coppola found in the first screenings of the movie was that people were confused. They were not engaged. They didn't like the movie because it was going back and forth too much. And while you might think, oh, the best thing to do is just keep bopping between the stories, keep them both alive. In fact, what Coppola found was he had to slow down and spend more time in each story. Initially, he had like 10 minutes in one, then 10 minutes in the other. That didn't work. When they recut it and did 20 minutes in one and then 20 minutes in the other, people got really into those stories because they had enough time to really become engaged before an episode concluded and they moved to the other storyline. So the question is, you're going to have to find your own rhythm, and that finding, as with Coppola, may require you to show it to some people and see if they're getting the feel, the rhythm, the story. Each character in multiple storylines has to be distinctive. They have to be somewhat unique, have some reason to be in the story that's different from the others. And you need to give everybody some juicy, defining moment, some action, some speech, some revelation, some distinctive style that makes us say, oh, I'm glad that person was in the story. Also, it makes actors say, okay, this isn't the biggest part, but it's juicy. It's got a great quality that I want to play. So those are the main things I wanted to talk about regarding the use of multiple storylines. Once again, my main message to you has to be, this is not different than telling any story. You need to understand who the characters are, what they are trying to do, and you need to simply, if you step away from them for a moment, that's okay, because you have to remember what they were doing. Then you go to the other one, you remember what they were doing, and then you're just telling stories. It's still the same task. It's still the same mission. It's still the same process for you. Once again, I want you to take a look at building character arcs and also take art apart. These are 2 videos. And also there's one about character itself, which these are all in the description. There's links. You can watch them at any time. And then just to get you started, here's a handful of multiple storyline stories that I think are good things to learn from. American Graffiti interweaves a bunch of high school students in one night at the end of the summer in the 1960s. Nashville, as I've mentioned, is which is actually kind of hard to find lately on streaming. But it is multiple storylines interwoven in the city of Nashville over the course of, I believe, a weekend. Magnolia, once again, it's by Paul Thomas Anderson. Once again, a group of different storylines which all in some way connect. The connections may take a while to find, or they may take a while to happen, but those stories are all connecting, and they are on a theme. The themes of family, the themes of loneliness, the themes of trauma, and the themes of frogs falling out of the sky. And then finally, Love Actually, once again, relating to a theme. The theme is stated at the very beginning and then played out with different ideas about love, what love can be, how love can work, what can get in the way of love, and how it can be resolved. It's a delightful movie. I would also suggest checking out not any particular Wes Anderson. Almost all of Wes Anderson's movies are ensemble collections lately, and they're fascinating in that way. Also, disaster movies. This was a genre from the 1970s and 80s, and they're terrible. They're awful. If you look at things like Earthquake, they're awful movies, but they do show you how to keep storylines going and how to define them. Airport, the original, one of the first, Airport and The Poseidon Adventure, 2 of the earliest 1960s disaster movies, are actually pretty good. And they both deal with this sense of some event bringing together disparate storylines and how they develop each one but keep cutting between them. They're good examples. Okay, Now I'm going to go back and look at the many, many, many comments we've got here. Okay, first of all, hi, Donna. Michael says, you see multiple storylines on television. Yes, yes, absolutely. Back in the 80s. And that was the other thing I was going to say, is that television truly are magnificent examples of how to interweave or intercut or develop multiple storylines. Obviously, the one thing that is important to recognize is that structurally they are different because they have more time. They have 6 to 12 to 50 hours to lay out the developments of their stories. But even within any given hour, watching how you move between storylines of any good series, you're probably going to be involved with multiple storylines, and it is well worth examining how they do that. Okay. Kirby says, what is your take on pinch points and the midpoint? What's supposed to happen at Kirby? I can tell you. Okay. First of all, as far as pinch points and the midpoint, I think that's just nonsense. I think that those are fairly meaningless attempts to standardize storytelling. The truth is, some stories, nothing interesting happens at the midpoint. Many good stories have something happen at the midpoint. In general, something should happen at the midpoint because something should always be happening. But the idea that something crucial or strategic or traditional should always happen at exactly the midpoint of a story is simply not true. So my take on, and I don't even know what pinch points are. Once again, what happens is somebody trying to create a theory of storytelling will analyze a bunch of stories and they will say, they all have this in common. Very often, the problem there is that what they've done is they've analyzed a group of stories from a single culture or industry, Hollywood in different periods, for instance, so that a lot of these theories come from examining what was popular in American cinema in the 1980s or 90s or something. And the answer is, well, yeah, they're all going to be alike because they all came from the same 5 companies and they were all desperately copying each other in an attempt to have a hit. The truth is, if you look at a wider selection of stories, any of these theories that at this point in the story, this always happens, they fall apart. They're just not true. As far as how do I personally define theme and utilize it, well, interestingly, I did a whole video on that. It's called Theme. And I urge you to look at that for my full and beautifully defined and stated analysis of what a theme is and how you can use it. I will put a link to that in the description at the end of this video, about 10 minutes after we're done here. So I would say that's where my theme stuff is. Angeli says, are there any ensemble or centered ensemble series anyone could recommend to me so I can study their structure? Slice of life, coming of age, or drama? Well, certainly, as far as series is one thing. When we were talking about, initially I was talking about movies, so I was talking about American Graffiti, The Big Chill. Those are all excellent. As far as series, ensemble series, almost all of them. Boardwalk Empire is an excellent one for that. Freaks and Geeks is an excellent one. There's so many. Honestly, The West Wing, ER. Honestly, there's more good ones than even Severance, than the new Apple show that is a big hit right now and is excellent. Severance is fabulous. Serialized series recommendations with an ensemble. There's just so many. Cheers, the sitcom. Serialized ensembles. I can't offhand, people chime in with good ensemble series recommendations. Fung says, I think The Inheritance, 1962, by Japanese director Masaki Kobayashi, is a masterpiece of multiple storylines. I have never seen it. There are many storylines of how each person in the family is trying to win the inheritance. That sounds great. I've never seen it, but certainly people should check it out. Hello, Saro Kokalo. Hi, nice to see you. I am very glad you are here. Greetings to Greece. Does Martin Scorsese's Casino have multiple storylines? Absolutely. There's three main stories going on there. There's De Niro, Pesci, and Sharon Stone. Even more so, his first big movie, Mean Streets, is following four different young men who are in Little Italy in the 1970s. They know each other, but they each have their own storylines developing. Robert Freeman asks, what is the reason Love Actually has multiple storylines? Well, the answer is partly that Richard Curtis likes Robert Altman films. That's what he said. He said in his introduction to the script of Love Actually, which is published, that he said himself, he said, I love Robert Altman's ensemble films, and I want to do one on a theme. And he wanted to talk about the theme of love. So the point, once again, is that the theme of love is very complicated. And to say, oh, all love is triumphing over obstacles and winning the heart of your true love, that's not true. And he wanted to say there's many kinds of love. If you've seen Love Actually, Laura Linney's love story, beautiful, heartbreaking, and very different from the other stories. Some stories are about how you need courage to pursue your love. In others, you have to have courage to give up on the pursuit of your love. The whole point is to say that love is complicated, that there are many versions of it. You can't tell that with one story, unless the story was about somebody who was like researching love. Which, by the way, Masters of Sex, the TV series from Showtime, was about that. Anyway, the answer is Richard Curtis did Love Actually in that format because he liked Robert Altman's films and he wanted to do one himself. He wanted to try that. Michael Tanaka says, I loved Irwin Allen disaster films, created a trend of multiple characters involved in a single event. Yes, exactly. Most famously, The Towering Inferno, which is truly not a good movie, but it's a kick, and it does feature multiple storylines. Angeli, yes, check out Inheritance. I'm sure as soon as I stop working here, I'm going to think of like 18 different great series with ensembles that you're following. Why don't you rant? Sealy Jack says, why don't you rant like Mark Kermode against the ridiculous Hollywood rules? Well, I don't know. I've never seen Mark Kermode. I don't know how he rants. I do rant a fair amount about these rules. I try to do it in a fairly positive way because, for one thing, I'm not trying to take down anybody. I'm not trying to destroy the rules. I think the rules can be valuable. I just think it's foolish to insist that the rules are absolute. They are rules and you can follow them, just like you can follow one or another philosophy of life or religion or political system. It doesn't mean that one is right. I think a great deal of the problems of our world comes from people insisting that their way is the only way. Okay. Hi, Matthew. Good to see you. Are you excited about Aaron Sorkin writing The Social Network too? Is that a real thing? I did not know. If so, yes, absolutely. I will see anything Aaron Sorkin does, even when I don't love them. I like them. Thank you, Learner. Thank you so much. If Social Network 2 is in fact in the works, bravo. It will be interesting to see if David Fincher comes back, and if so, if they reassemble Jesse Eisenberg in the cast, or whether it's simply a new Mark Zuckerberg story in the Mark Zuckerberg universe. Matthew says, I think some people confuse simple with boring. Some of the best stories are very simple stories. I think that's true. But nonetheless, that does not necessarily mean that you cannot do clear, simple, powerful, multiple storylines. Speaking of multiple storylines, series, The Newsroom by Aaron Sorkin, I quite liked. Glenn's fan club says, what do you mean by juicy? Stories can't have juice like a beef. Well, beef is a good story, but it's not ensemble. But it is multiple. In other words, there's a Netflix series, a limited series called Beef, which tells two intersecting storylines, which is two is still multiple. Anyway, what do I mean by juicy? Juicy, flavorful. It's an adjective simply meaning interesting, exciting, stimulating, having some life to it. Juicy is simply a word. Likely means impactful. Yeah, flavorful, stylish, something enjoyable. That's what juicy means. When you talk about a juicy moment in a script, you're saying this is something enjoyable. It's something heightened. It's something fun or scary or whatever it is that you're doing. Imogen says, my book has multiple storylines. It's tricky to juggle them. They're interwoven. It's a lot of fun. Yes, let me once again emphasize, there are two good ways to try and handle juggling the mechanics, the structure of multiple storylines. And the first way is outlining. I have done 2 videos, how to outline and why outline. I urge you to take a look at those. I will put links to them down below in the description right after this is done. But outlining is certainly a good way because you can step back and you can look at your structure and make sure that you've covered all the steps of a certain story and not jumped over something or lost your way. However, it is quite possible to write without an outline, even multiple storylines. The thing that you then have to do is either be able to keep it all in your head. I personally can't. That's why I write it down. That's why I outline. But the other thing about doing it without an outline is you probably will have to do drafts in which you try something out and then you read through it and you go, oh, that's not playing the way I wanted, or that's too long, or that's too short, or whatever, whatever it is. The not outlining requires usually more drafts. It's not, I mean, it's possible that you would simply get it all right in one shot. Usually you don't. Most artists don't get a narrative completely working in one draft. And therefore outlining is sort of like solving some of those problems before you've gone to all the trouble of writing all the texture. But everybody's different and you should do it the way you like. No more comments or questions because I'm going to have to be leaving soon. I've always loved the idea of using the inheritance as the protagonist and how everyone is so greedy over it. Fang is talking about this movie, The Inheritance. Wolf Powers says, I would probably feel uncertain and bewildered writing my multi-main character novel series had I not watched you rip out every scene involving a single character in your live screenwriting sessions. Yes, that is something I talk about doing it here in the building character arcs video. Please take a look at that. One thing I suggest doing is simply make a copy of whatever you're doing and then remove everything except one storyline. If you have multiple storylines, make a version which is just one storyline and read through it, look through it, follow it, track it. Because it can be very easy to lose the thread. And so by simply throwing out all the other stuff, because the people who are living this story, they only live their part of it. So if you want to follow their life, it's worth taking a moment to actually just go step by step through a storyline without looking at the others. I Hate Jackie Chan says, I always hated disaster movies. I can't blame you. Most of them have some of the worst characters and dialogue you've ever seen. They're often terrible, but now and then you get one. If you're in the mood, they can be fun. Mookie MC says, arriving late, so maybe you answered this, but would you consider a movie or TV show that relies heavily on flashbacks as a storytelling method with multiple storylines? So the question is, could your story, your multiple storylines be the same person at different times in their life? And I would say yes. That to me would be 2 storylines. The storylines of person when they were 10 and when they are 40. And those 2 storylines each have to track as a whole story. In other words, it has to, for whatever story you are telling in the 2 times that you are interweaving and how they influence or reveal things about each other, each one still is its own story. And the comparing or contrasting of those two stories, that is the story of the whole. That's how I look at it. Glenn, do you watch Japanese anime? I've watched a few. I just haven't had time to watch as many as I would like, but I have watched some and liked them. My son has showed me a bunch, so I learned through them. Goodbye Eri. That's a manga. It's not a. I don't think that there's an anime of it. That was terrific. And just Look Back. I just saw Look Back. That was wonderful. I saw Tokyo Godfathers was a knockout. Devilman Crybaby I really liked. That's bizarre and perverse, but really cool. I don't know. There's a lot. There are some, and I have seen them. Andy in the Go Draft channel talks about theories. Fargo is a successful movie, but if we use that as a framework and always include protagonists in the first act, that would be insanity. Yeah, different people are going to espouse different theories. It is important to remember that the business of teaching is the business of saying, I'm choosing to espouse a certain theory very often. It's a brand. That may be good for the teacher. It may not be good for the artist who is trying to learn from them, in my opinion. Isolated Network says, hi, Glenn. And I say, hi, Isolated Network. What do you think about the style technique that Christopher Nolan uses? He talks about writing screenplays almost from the end to the beginning or chopping different storylines in different orders, non-chronologically. What do you think about it? Well, first of all, I think that's how Christopher Nolan's mind works, so he should just do what is good for him. I love Christopher Nolan's work almost always, even Tenet. But I would not say that everyone else should do that. I should say it's good to learn how he does it, and to recognize how, by intercutting the different times and ideas, he can produce a certain effect or a theme. Oppenheimer in particular is 3 hours of swirling bits and pieces that build to a singular vision. I think it's wonderful. Not everyone likes it. Oh, Angeli, you want to see a really great multiple storyline ensemble kind of story? Deadwood, the HBO series from a ways back. Marvelous writing, marvelous creation of a whole community. Deadwood, I highly recommend. So the answer is, what do I think about Christopher Nolan? I think Christopher Nolan does great work. I don't think everything should be like that. I also think Dunkirk didn't work because he applied too much chronological messing with it, and actually there wasn't really a great value to that. But overall, I would say, it's good stuff. Why not? You can learn from anybody. You don't have to do exactly what they do. Threat of Nemesis says, thanks to you, I finished my first draft and getting feedback on that psychological horror Renaissance short. Now on to a bigger script with 10 family members. What advice can you give to be motivated? There's a couple, I will try and find them. There's a couple of my other live streams talking about how to keep going, how to not be discouraged, how to stay motivated. I will try and put links down below after this is over. So look for that. Okay. Angeli says, I'm struggling to find the shared theme and relationship between the characters. They live and interact in the same environment, but have extremely different lifestyles and beliefs, to where the switch between them is a little jarring. All I can say is that it certainly isn't because of people having different lifestyles or beliefs. In other words, the excitement of the story can be seeing these different lifestyles and beliefs in one story. Oh, Pachinko, there's another one. Pachinko is a TV series that is intercutting several storylines in several timelines. So it's got layers and layers of intercutting, but they very often, the people feel very, very differently, live very, very differently from each other. And what happens is, by comparing them, by putting them next to each other, by showing how they affect each other. That's the important thing. Think about, once again, what is the relationship between the storylines? Like if you are showing people with very, very different lifestyles in the same place, the question is, are they affecting each other? Or is one revealing something about the others? Downton Abbey, another great example of a community multi-storyline in which by seeing the different lifestyles in this one household, by seeing the class layers and the changing of time, those thematic elements are brought out, while each character has a wonderful romantic or melodramatic storyline. The stories are fun, they are emotional, but the thematic elements are produced by combining the different stories, so that the answer is, you don't have to have any one person say it all. You can, but you also can simply say, by comparing, by putting the radical up against the traditionalist, by putting the hedonist against the stoic, you're going to be raising questions. And the question really becomes, what are you thinking about those things? What do you believe about it? Because that's what the story will show. Okay. Would you seek professional coverage over having friends read your script? That depends. Professional coverage, I am not a big fan. I feel like most of the time simply getting a bunch of different reads from people you know. However, if you don't know a lot of people who know much about screenwriting, you might want to put it out to some community or to some professionals, but not just one. But my answer would be, the thing about having friends read script is they are not necessarily any better than anyone else. The main thing about having people read your work is have a bunch of them do it, so that you can sort of average out the responses, as opposed to having any one person's opinion matter too much, because honestly, no one person's opinion does matter that much. Okay, no more questions, please. Forgot one thing that I wanted to ask me, you. How specific do you think someone should be in an action line in a script? Is more specific better? Maybe. My answer is always more specific is better. But I also did a whole live stream about describing action. I will try and put a link down below, but look through my old live streams. There will be one about describing action, about writing action. Okay, sorry. Trying to keep track of all the things I have to link to. I find that many movies made outside of Hollywood is likely not following any of those screenwriting rules. Absolutely. You'll also find that different places have different rules. It doesn't, like the anime world, the Bollywood world, they have their own rules, and those rules are very different than Hollywood rules. Doesn't mean they're not rules. The rules are whatever your personal beliefs are and whatever the culture you're working on is. So the screenwriting rules just happen to be churning out of the Hollywood industry of selling how to get into Hollywood, which has become its own business, and you should be wary of any rules that they are providing. What do you think of Aaron Sorkin's dialogue style? I like it. I wouldn't want it to be the only one that existed in the world, but I certainly like it. I enjoy listening to it. He's smart. He's stylish. It's good stuff. Cool. Thank you, Angela. Yes, check out Deadwood. It's wonderful. I have absolutely no idea what to write for the next screenplay. What to do? I can't find anything to tell. Wow, that's a big subject. I believe I have done, and I'm going to look into, I believe I did a whole live stream on how do you decide what to write. Let me see if I can link to it down below. Or also the how do you decide if an idea is good. Anyway, I'll try and link to those below. Sorry, there's just too big a topic for 1:59 p.m. But the answer is write something you want to write. If you can't think of anything, maybe take a break and then come back to it. More likely, you're thinking of a lot of things, but thinking they're not good enough, and that's a separate problem. The answer is it's never not good enough. It's what are you going to do with it? And then Sanchez Pablo says, didn't you say coaching is better than coverage? Yes. If possible, if you get along with the coach that you are hiring or working with, obviously it makes a difference to have some back and forth, to be able to ask questions, to be able to analyze together. Coverage is it's a book review. It's a book report. It's somebody's opinion that can be valuable. It'll entirely depend on the insights and the writing abilities of the person doing the coverage. I'm not saying coverage is awful. I'm saying that you have to be aware that it's simply somebody's book report. It's somebody's opinion at the moment that they are writing it. They may be writing for a company that has very specific requirements. They may be saying, they may be working for a company that's saying, we don't like multiple storylines, or we don't like historical stories, or we want things with happy endings. Whatever it is, that means that the coverage is going to be skewed towards that. So the answer is coverage is valuable, but usually only if seen in a group. If you're getting a bunch of opinions, then you begin to sort out what is common among them. Otherwise, opinions are just opinions. Everybody's got one. And with that, I say thank you so much. I am going to take a moment after this to try and put some of the links down there. For those of you who asked questions that were too big or that I had answered elsewhere, I will try to link to those live streams below. And therefore, in the meantime, go write something.